Life on the plantation followed rules that were rarely spoken out loud, yet everyone understood them clearly. People were expected to work, obey, and never question how things operated. Most learned quickly that survival depended on staying invisible. Sarah understood those rules too, but there was one problem. Her mind did not work the way the system expected. From a young age, Sarah noticed patterns everywhere. She paid attention to details that others ignored. While most people around her were focused on getting through each exhausting day, she quietly studied how things functioned behind the scenes. Her father, Elijah, worked long hours repairing tools and assisting with maintenance around the property. Because of that, he occasionally passed near the plantation office where records were kept. One evening, when Sarah was still young, he showed her something simple but dangerous: how to read numbers written in the shipment logs. It started as curiosity, but curiosity quickly turned into skill. Sarah began observing how supplies were counted, how harvest totals were recorded, and how payments were listed in the ledgers. The more she watched, the more she realized something strange was happening. The numbers in the books did not always match the work she saw happening in the fields every day. At first, she said nothing. Speaking up in a place like that could bring serious consequences. Still, she continued paying attention, building an understanding of the plantation's operations in ways no one expected. Years passed, and Sarah became known among the workers as someone dependable and unusually sharp. If someone forgot how many baskets they had filled or how much work had been completed, Sarah could estimate it with surprising accuracy. Then one day, a situation changed everything. Mr. Vance, the plantation owner, was furious about an error in a shipment report. The overseer had accused several workers of miscounting produce, and punishment was being discussed. Sarah happened to be nearby when the argument began. She listened carefully as the numbers were debated. Something about the report did not make sense to her. Against her better judgment, she spoke. The room immediately went quiet. Sarah explained that the workers had not made the mistake. The issue came from the way the shipments had been logged in the office. She pointed out a pattern in the records showing that certain totals had been duplicated. Everyone expected Mr. Vance to react with anger. Instead, he studied her. He pulled additional records from a cabinet and placed them in front of her, clearly testing whether she truly understood what she was talking about. Sarah answered every question carefully, showing exactly where the calculations had gone wrong and how the records could be corrected. The overseer looked irritated, but Mr. Vance's reaction was different. He was intrigued. That moment marked the beginning of something unusual. Mr. Vance did not publicly acknowledge what had happened, because doing so would disrupt the power structure he relied on. However, later that evening, Sarah received a quiet message asking her to come to the office after dark. When she arrived, a stack of ledgers waited on the desk. Mr. Vance gave her a simple task. Check the numbers. At first, the work was small. She corrected totals and reorganized entries that had been rushed or poorly recorded. But very quickly, Mr. Vance realized something important. Sarah was not just careful with numbers. She understood them. Within weeks, the accuracy of the plantation's records improved dramatically. Problems that had existed for years began disappearing one by one. Yet almost no one knew why. During the day, Sarah continued working like everyone else. But at night, she was quietly becoming something the plantation had never expected. Someone who understood the truth hidden inside the numbers. And Mr. Vance had started to realize just how valuable that could be. What began as a small task soon turned into something far more serious. After that first night in the office, Mr. Vance did not treat Sarah like someone who had simply helped fix a mistake. He started testing her, not openly and never in front of anyone else. But each time she returned after dark, there were more ledgers waiting, more records to review, and more calculations to verify. At first, the problems were simple. columns that had been added incorrectly, expenses recorded in the wrong place, shipment totals that had been copied twice by accident. Sarah fixed them quickly. Mr. Vance watched every step. He would deliberately choose pages at random and ask her what they meant. Sometimes he would point at a long column of numbers and ask her to calculate the total without writing anything down. Other times, he would ask her to explain how certain payments moved from one ledger to another. Each time, Sarah answered correctly. It was not just memory or luck. She understood how the entire system worked. One night, after checking several pages himself, Mr. Vance set down his pen and stared at her with a strange expression. "This is highly unusual," he said slowly. "Possibly even dangerous." Sarah remained quiet. She already understood what he meant. If anyone found out that she had been taught how to read financial records, it could cause serious trouble for both of them. Education like that was not supposed to happen. Mr. Vance leaned back in his chair, thinking carefully. "I need these records managed properly," he said finally. "But I cannot allow anyone to know who is actually doing the work." Sarah understood immediately. He was offering her something strange. Not freedom and not recognition, but something that could change her life in a different way. Work that mattered. "You will come here before dawn, Mr. Vance continued. "And again after dark. No one must see you entering or leaving. Officially, I am handling these books myself." He paused for a moment before adding the rest. "In return, you and your mother will receive better living conditions and my protection from anyone who might cause trouble." It was not a fair arrangement, but it was the only opportunity Sarah had ever been given to use her mind instead of just her hands. So she agreed. And from that moment forward, Sarah began living two lives. Every morning she woke while the sky was still dark. She moved quietly so she would not disturb her mother, though most of the time Della was already awake, watching her with concern. Sarah would walk carefully through the silent paths of the plantation until she reached the office. Just like Mr. Vance promised, the door would be unlocked. Inside, a small stack of paperwork always waited. Receipts from recent purchases, bills for supplies, reports about shipments of cotton and timber, payment records from buyers in nearby towns. Sarah worked quickly but carefully. Every number had to be exact. There was no room for obvious mistakes, because if something looked suspicious, people would begin asking questions. By the time the rest of the plantation started waking up, Sarah was already gone. Then she returned to her normal life. She helped in the house, carried out daily tasks, and behaved like any other worker. No one suspected that she had just spent hours managing the financial records of the entire plantation. At night, the routine repeated. Sometimes Mr. Vance would already be in the office when she arrived, reviewing the work she had completed earlier. He asked questions often, not because he doubted her, but because he wanted to understand how she thought. And the more he learned, the more uncomfortable he seemed to become. Sarah was becoming too valuable. That created a strange tension between them. Mr. Vance depended on her skill, but he also knew that if the truth came out, his reputation could collapse. Still, the system worked. For a while. As the months passed, the secret system between Sarah and Mr. Vance became more organized and more complicated. What started as correcting errors slowly turned into something much larger. Sarah was no longer just fixing numbers. She was managing them. Every transaction that moved through the plantation eventually passed through the ledgers on that desk, and Sarah learned how every part of the business functioned. She knew which buyers paid on time and which ones delayed their payments. She knew how much each field produced during different seasons and which investments brought profit or loss. Most importantly, she began noticing patterns that even Mr. Vance had missed. One evening, while reviewing several years of records, Sarah discovered something concerning. The plantation had borrowed a large amount of money from a bank in Charleston a few years earlier. At the time, the expansion probably seemed like a smart decision. But the debt was heavier than it appeared. Cotton production had dropped slightly the previous year, and to cover the shortfall, Mr. Vance had quietly sold part of the timberland owned by the plantation. That information was buried deep in the records. Anyone glancing quickly at the books would not notice it. But Sarah noticed everything. Over time, Mr. Vance began asking her questions that went beyond simple bookkeeping. "What do you think about increasing production in the southern fields?" he asked one night while reviewing her calculations. Sarah did not answer immediately. She thought through the numbers in her mind. "If the soil continues to weaken, yields will decline within 2 seasons," she said carefully. "Rotating crops would reduce short-term profit, but it would protect the land." Mr. Vance studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. More often than not, he followed her advice. That created a strange reality on the plantation. Other landowners began praising Mr. Vance for his excellent business decisions. They admired how organized his records were and how profitable the property had become. None of them knew the truth. Behind those decisions was a young woman who could not publicly claim any of it. By the time Sarah turned 16, she was effectively running the financial operations of the entire plantation. Mr. Vance still signed documents and handled public matters, but the calculations, planning, and analysis came from her. Yet the arrangement also made him uneasy. Sometimes he tested her suddenly, almost as if he hoped to catch a mistake. "This calculation looks wrong," he would say. Sarah would calmly review the figures again. "It is correct," she would reply. Then she would explain every step until he had no choice but to admit she was right. Other times, he would grow quiet while watching her work, as if he could not decide whether to be impressed or concerned. He relied on her more than anyone else, but admitting that truth was impossible. Meanwhile, Sarah's mother noticed the cost of this secret life. Sarah was constantly exhausted. She slept less than anyone else on the plantation and carried responsibilities far heavier than most people realized. One morning, just after sunrise, DeLaff finally spoke her mind. "You are pushing yourself too hard," she said, watching Sarah return from the office. "I am doing what I am good at," Sarah replied. "But you have no life beyond those books." Sarah hesitated before answering. "Those books are the only place where I am not treated like property," she said quietly. "When I am working there, I am someone who matters." DeLapp placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You matter whether you are in that office or not." Sarah wanted to believe that, but the truth was complicated. Inside the office, surrounded by ledgers and numbers, she had influence. She understood how the plantation survived, how money moved, and how decisions shaped the future. Knowledge gave her a kind of freedom. Not the kind that allowed her to leave, but the kind that allowed her to understand the world that controlled her. For several years, that secret balance held steady, until the day a new overseer arrived on the plantation. And unlike everyone else, he paid attention to things that did not seem to matter. At least not at first. The precarious balance Sarah had maintained for years began to unravel one evening during a dinner party at the Vance estate. Mr. Vance had invited several neighboring planters and a merchant from Charleston, hoping to flaunt the plantation's supposed success. The dining room buzzed with polite conversation, the clinking of glasses, and murmurs of admiration for Vance's perfect ledgers. Sarah, moving quietly between the kitchen and the dining room, kept the glasses filled and plates cleared, careful not to draw attention to herself. The conversation inevitably turned to business. Cotton prices, labor, and political matters dominated, until one of the guests, Harrison, praised Vance. "You've done remarkably well these past few years, Vance." "What's your secret?" Vance responded with practiced modesty: careful planning, meticulous record-keeping, wise investments. Carlyle, the Charleston merchant, added that the ledgers were legendary. The room hummed with approval, until Fletcher, the overseer, stepped forward. "That's not entirely accurate, sir," Fletcher said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Silence fell immediately. All eyes turned to him and then to Sarah. She froze, aware of the tension she had avoided for years. "What do you mean?" Vance asked, his voice tight. Fletcher's words cut deeper than any whip. "Your ledgers, your complex analyses, your business acumen, they're not yours. They are the work of a 16-year-old slave girl who shouldn't even be able to write her name." The gasps were audible. Sarah stood in the corner, holding a wine pitcher, every eye on her. The room was split between disbelief and unease. Vance tried to dismiss it, claiming Fletcher misunderstood what he had seen, but the damage was already done. Rumors would spread faster than any denial. Within a week, whispers circulated across the county. Thomas Vance, they said, had an enslaved girl managing his finances. The gossip distorted reality, some suggesting nefarious involvement. Vance's reputation suffered immediately. Other planters eyed him with suspicion, questioning whether his decisions were truly his own. Partners requested independent audits, wary of blind trust. Soon after, Vance called Sarah into his study. "This arrangement is over," he said bluntly. "I can't afford you handling the accounts anymore. The talk is damaging my standing." Sarah accepted the dismissal with quiet composure. She understood her role had been precarious. Vance handed her a final task: organize the books so a new accountant from Charleston could take over, with clear guides, instructions, and indexes. 2 weeks, he added. After that, back to regular duties. As she worked, Sarah discovered discrepancies in the ledgers. Orders for textiles far exceeded what the plantation needed, but the excess cloth wasn't in storage. Comparing deliveries to records, she realized that someone missed her. Vance himself had been skimming funds, diverting money to a personal account to prepare for the inevitable financial collapse. The pattern began 2 years prior, shortly after a massive loan from the Bank of Charleston. The plantation had been mortgaged to cover Vance's inherited debts. He was not a master of wealth, but a caretaker desperately concealing failure. The system relied on Sarah's loyalty and skill, keeping the fiction of success intact. Now she was a liability. Vance was discarding her, just as he had discarded truth. Sarah meticulously documented the evidence, creating 2 sets of records, one hidden in her cabin, the other placed strategically in the ledger for the incoming accountant. Each note, each entry was crafted to expose the misappropriations while keeping her anonymous. She calculated shortfalls, linked the fraudulent purchases to Vance's personal accounts, and prepared a concise explanation of the embezzlement. By the time Richard Hayes, the new accountant, arrived, Sarah had completed her work. Hayes, unremarkable and professional, had no knowledge of Fairmont's complex financial history. Within days, he began noticing inconsistencies. A note Sarah had left prompted him to investigate the textile purchases. Hayes quickly realized the scale of Vance's theft and reported it to the bank. Within 2 days, the Bank of Charleston took control of Fairmont. Vance had vanished overnight, leaving behind only rumors of flight. Sarah and Della, once insulated by their positions, now faced an uncertain future, fearful of what a bank-controlled sale might mean. The first wave of reckoning had arrived, and Sarah knew that the numbers she had recorded would shape it. The ledger would reveal the truth behind Vance's actions, and although she could not claim credit, her work ensured the plantation's hidden realities would finally be uncovered. With Fairmont under the Bank of Charleston's control, Sarah's careful planning began to bear fruit. The new accountant, Richard Hayes, followed the instructions she had left behind, scrutinizing the ledgers and cross-referencing purchases. It quickly became clear that Thomas Vance had been diverting funds through fraudulent textile orders. Hayes reported the findings to the bank, and within days, a representative named Mr. Williams arrived to assess the plantation's situation. Sarah observed from a distance, noting the growing stack of flagged entries and the somber expressions of the bank officials. They reviewed the records, checked payments, and calculated losses. The extent of Vance's deception was undeniable. On the 3rd day, Mr. Williams called a meeting with the household staff. "Thomas Vance has defaulted on his loan through criminal misconduct," he announced. The bank assumed immediate control of the property. Operations would continue, but the plantation would likely be sold to satisfy the outstanding debt. The staff murmured, fear creeping in. The prospect of being sold and separated was a terror that haunted every enslaved person on the property. Sarah and Delac clung to one another in the cabin, understanding that their relatively comfortable life was ending. Yet the work Sarah had done gave her a sense of agency, a small victory in the chaos. Soon Mr. Williams summoned Sarah. He had reviewed her involvement with the ledgers and acknowledged her exceptional skill. Unlike others who would have ignored or punished her for her literacy and abilities, Williams offered an unusual arrangement. Hayes would serve as the official accountant of record, presenting the work publicly, but Sarah would continue the detailed accounting behind the scenes. In exchange, she and her mother would remain at Fairmont under protected status, with conditions guaranteeing that they would not be separated and would retain administrative roles rather than being relegated to field labor. It was not freedom, but it was recognition. Her skills and integrity were acknowledged in a way that afforded her and Delac safety and a measure of influence. The Randolph family, who eventually purchased Fairmont, honored this arrangement, recognizing Sarah's essential role in the plantation's operations. They respected her judgment and occasionally sought her opinion on business matters, a small but meaningful validation. Yet beyond numbers and ledgers, Sarah began a secret project of her own. Using a simple cipher she developed, she kept a private journal documenting the lives of the enslaved people at Fairmont. She recorded births, deaths, skills, relationships, and moments of joy and resilience. The journal preserved humanity that the official ledgers reduced to numerical entries. She chronicled small acts of resistance, stolen meals, accidental damage, and coded songs carrying messages of hope and defiance. Weddings, births, and daily joys were noted with reverence. In this hidden ledger, the enslaved people were more than property, they were human. The journal remained hidden for years, sewn into her mattress lining, the same place she had concealed evidence against Vance. By day, she maintained perfect financial records. By night, she recorded the lives and stories that the plantation's official accounts could never capture. Long after Sarah's death, the journal was discovered during renovations. Historians found the pages yellowed but readable, filled with careful handwriting and a substitution cipher. Decoding it revealed a treasure trove of intimate knowledge about Fairmont's enslaved population from 1847 to 1861. Experts verified the authenticity of the handwriting by comparing it to preserved ledgers, confirming Sarah's work. Further historical documents mentioned her, highlighting her literacy and accounting skills. Sarah's dual legacy endured: the financial ledgers, exposing the hidden failings and embezzlement at Fairmont, and the secret journal, preserving the humanity of those enslaved. The numbers revealed economic truths, but her writings revealed human truths: names, stories, skills, and the quiet resilience of people forced into lives of hardship. Both were essential. In the end, the ledger of human lives survived, telling the complete story. It was a testament to Sarah's intellect, courage, and unwavering commitment to truth. Through meticulous records and quiet defiance, she ensured that when history looked back on Fairmont, it would see both the cost of wealth built on oppression and the dignity of those who endured it. The numbers remained, the stories endured, and Sarah's voice, long silenced, finally spoke.